Have you ever stopped to think about what it really means to figure out your life? It's not just about paying bills on time or achieving the long-dreamed success. This idea often feels like an unreachable utopia, a dream reserved for the brave few. But what if I told you that figuring out your life isn't just possible? It's inevitable for those who dare to face themselves head-on. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychologist, once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Think about it. Every time something or someone deeply bothers you, could it be holding up a mirror to you? A reflection of something you might not want to see in yourself? That's right. And what if that discomfort is actually the key to transforming your story? The journey starts with a simple question, one that keeps many people up at night. Who are you when no one is watching? This is the starting point for exploring Jung's concept of the shadow. The shadow is that hidden, rejected side of us we prefer to bury deep. And here's the curious part. It's precisely that ignored part that shapes many of our decisions, and yes, our stumbles too. The story of the person who figured out their life isn't some distant fable. It's a journey that, if you're brave enough, could be yours. It's not about magic formulas or prepackaged motivational quotes, but about learning to embrace discomfort, to accept the things you're most afraid to face, the parts of yourself that don't fit Instagram filters. In a world where perfection is sold as an obligation, embracing your imperfections is almost an act of rebellion. And it's exactly that act that begins every transformation. Now imagine this. You're standing in a room full of mirrors. Each one reflects not just your image, but also your memories, the mistakes you pretend to forget, and the desires you don't like to admit you have. So what will you do? Will you shatter the mirrors, or will you face each one? The choice is yours, and it defines the path ahead. The man who figured out life wasn't a superhero, a wise sage, or a saint. He was an ordinary person, just like you and me, but with the courage to ask himself the question most people avoid: who am I really? In the midst of this journey, Jung introduces us to a fascinating concept, the collective unconscious. He explains that we all carry within us archetypes, the hero, the mentor, the shadow, and so on. These are universal figures that shape our fears, dreams, and even the way we behave. It's like discovering a map to a forgotten treasure. You realize that despite your internal struggles, you are never truly alone. But hold on, let's not romanticize this. Diving into yourself isn't like going on a seaside retreat with a sunset view. It involves pain. It involves chaos. Facing your shadow is challenging. That's why many people choose to do nothing. But here's what set apart the man who figured out life. He chose to face the abyss. And do you know what he discovered there? That inner chaos is not the enemy. It's the soil where the deepest transformations take root. Throughout this video, we'll explore this inspiring journey, delving into Jung's teachings and stories that show how the effort to understand ourselves is a universal one. We're not here to hand you ready-made answers. Our goal is to provoke you to reflect. How can this idea of figuring out life apply to yours? So I invite you to think, if today were the day to start figuring out your life, what would be your first step? Accepting a truth you keep avoiding, facing a fear that's been lurking in the shadows, or simply stopping the endless escape from who you really are? Whatever it may be, the most important thing is to start. The awakening of the man who figured out life doesn't begin with something grand. It starts with a simple but transformative truth. Change always comes from within. And that's exactly what we'll explore together, step by step, on this journey of self-discovery. Ready to begin? Human life is, at its core, a great search. We seek meaning, happiness, recognition, and at the heart of it all, we long for connection. Connection with others, with the world, and often with a part of ourselves that seems lost. But what happens when this search pulls us away from who we truly are? Carl Jung referred to this dilemma as the process of individuation. It's like an internal clash between who we are and who we try to be. A battle between ourself and the forces of the unconscious. It's not an easy path. In fact, it's one of those journeys that demands strength, vulnerability, and above all, courage. But here's the fascinating part. This journey, challenging yet transformative, leads us to integrate everything that makes up our essence. The parts we show the world and those we prefer to hide. The journey of the inner hero isn't just another cliche we come across in books or epic movies. It's actually a universal necessity, something all of us experience often without realizing it. Joseph Campbell, famous for his studies on mythology and a great admirer of Jung's work, described the monomyth, a universal narrative structure that appears in stories from around the world. And here's a reality check. You're living this storyline right now. Have you stopped to think about the challenges you've faced recently? Maybe it's tension at work, a conflict with someone close to you, or perhaps that whirlwind of internal emotions you've been trying to ignore. These challenges aren't random. They are the calls to adventure in your own journey. The question is, Do you have the courage to answer those calls? For Jung, the greatest obstacle on this path isn't the external world, but our own ego. It's the ego that tries to keep everything under control, that makes us avoid discomfort and protect the image we present to the world. The ego whispers, "You're just this. Don't touch the rest." But we are so much more than appearances, wouldn't you agree? True transformation happens when we dare to challenge that ego and allow ourselves to face what's hidden in the unconscious. Do you know what this process feels like? It's like standing in front of a dark cave. The entrance is intimidating, almost like a warning that says, "Do not enter." Inside, there's something you fear, but it also holds an invaluable treasure. That cave is your psyche. And the treasure? Self-knowledge. But of course, to reach it, you have to step into the darkness and face the fears that dwell there. If we look back, history is full of examples of people who took this dive. Frodo, from The Lord of the Rings, had to deal with the corruption of the ring. Luke Skywalker had to confront the weight of his legacy in Star Wars. These fictional heroes are perfect metaphors for the challenge Jung presents, to face and integrate what is dark and unknown within us. But don't be fooled into thinking this journey is a straight path. Not at all. It's full of twists, stumbles, and that urge to give up. And do you know what Jung said about those moments? That they're not signs of weakness. On the contrary, they're signs of progress. A hero becomes a hero only because, even when everything seems lost, they choose to keep going. The man who figured out his life started with a simple yet overwhelming question: who am I really? And the answer didn't come for free. He had to let go of certainties, question the truths he believed in, and accept that he didn't have all the answers. It was in that space of doubt that he found the opportunity to grow. Now let me ask you this. What if the discomfort you feel today is actually an invitation? What if your fears, instead of being enemies, are guides pointing to parts of yourself you have yet to explore? This is the essence of the inner hero's journey, transforming adversity into learning, doubt into self-awareness, and pain into growth. Throughout this video, we'll dive into this path and uncover that the hero isn't someone special, chosen by divine forces. The hero is anyone, any one of us, who chooses to face what lies within: fears, shadows, uncertainties, everything. So I leave you with one final challenge. Are you ready to answer the call? Have you ever felt that almost visceral discomfort when crossing paths with someone who seems to effortlessly get on your nerves? Maybe it's the person who talks way too loud, as if the whole world were their stage, or perhaps someone who behaves in a way you find unbearable. But what if I told you that the discomfort isn't so much about them, but about you? Yeah, I know. Unsettling, right? Carl Jung would say this is your shadow reflecting back at you. The shadow, according to Jung, is that dark corner within us where we stash everything we don't want to face: fears, unconfessed desires, impulses we try to suppress. It's like the basement of your mind, packed with dusty boxes. You know they're there, but you'd rather not open them. After all, who wants to stir up something that might cause a mess? But ignoring it doesn't solve anything. In fact, it was only when the so-called man who had it all figured out decided to confront his dark side that he took a giant leap in his personal journey. Not as someone gearing up for a fight, but as someone making peace with an essential part of themselves. Think of the shadow as a distorted mirror. When someone irritates you, often that person is reflecting something you reject in yourself. It's as if the shadow is nudging you, saying, "Hey, look over here." That irritation with someone who's impulsive, maybe you have impulses you're trying to suppress, or judging someone for having no filter. Perhaps it's your own fear of being misunderstood speaking up. Deep down, what you see and criticize in others may actually be something you also carry but prefer to hide. Let me illustrate with a story. Imagine a mother who constantly criticizes her daughter for being ambitious and bold. She says things like, "Don't aim too high, it's dangerous." Or, "People will think you're full of yourself." It might seem like she's being protective, right? But if we look deeper, we'll see something else. That mother, in her past, was just like her daughter, daring, fearless, but she was rejected and judged for it. To protect herself, she started repressing those traits. Now she projects this inner conflict onto her daughter. It's an invisible dance across generations where one person's wounds are passed down as critiques of another. The truth is, facing your shadow isn't for the faint of heart. It's uncomfortable to admit that what bothers us in others might be a hidden version of ourselves. Jung called this shadow work. But contrary to popular belief, the goal isn't to get rid of it. It's to integrate it, to make peace with that part of yourself you've exiled. It's not easy, but it's far from impossible. So, how do you do it? Start by reflecting. The next time someone deeply irritates you, pause and ask yourself, why does this bother me so much? Sometimes the answer will surprise you. It could be a fear of making mistakes, an unfulfilled desire, or even a long-buried anger you didn't realize was still there. Another path is to seek self-awareness. Therapy, meditation, journaling about your feelings. These are all ways to open those boxes in the basement. Gradually, you'll start to notice patterns and emotions that have been hidden but have been influencing you all along. The point is, confronting your shadow requires effort, intention, and yes, a bit of courage to face discomfort. But you know what's incredible? That discomfort doesn't last forever. It makes way for something far more powerful, the acceptance of who you truly are. The man who figured out his life discovered that his shadow wasn't a monster in the closet. It was a teacher. He realized that listening to what it had to say was the key to understanding his fears, passions, and motivations. He didn't need to destroy it. He needed to turn it into an ally. And in doing so, what once felt like a burden became a guide for his growth. So let me ask you, what have you been avoiding within yourself? What part of your story or personality have you been trying to ignore? Facing your shadow may seem terrifying, but it's also liberating. Because in the end, it's only by confronting who we truly are that we can be free. So, are you ready to open those boxes? Transformation rarely comes gently. It often arrives like a whirlwind, tearing down what you thought was solid, disrupting your life in ways that feel unbearable. But according to Carl Jung, it is precisely in this chaotic terrain that something new and true can be born. Chaos, he said, is not the opposite of order, it's the cradle of change. And the person who has resolved their life discovers that by diving headfirst into moments of greatest disorder, they are not losing themselves, they are finding themselves. Think of a volcano erupting. At first it's pure destruction. Heat, explosions, smoke covering everything. Terrifying, right? But once the lava cools, it creates fertile soil, allowing new life to flourish where there was once nothing. This is how chaos works in our minds. It destroys certainties that no longer serve us, dismantles illusions we maintained out of convenience, but in doing so, it makes space for the authentic to emerge. Jung believed that moments of inner turmoil, no matter how unbearable they seem, are invitations to explore the deepest parts of ourselves. He called this process a confrontation with the unconscious, a tense and often painful journey into the darkest regions of our psyche. He experienced it firsthand. During a personal crisis, Jung began having visions and hearing voices that initially made him question his sanity. But instead of running away, he plunged into that chaos, examined every detail, and documented his experiences. This process gave rise to some of his most brilliant ideas. For the person who resolved their life, chaos came in the form of an emotional breakdown. They found themselves adrift, questioning everything, their choices, their beliefs, the meaning of their existence. But instead of rushing to patch the holes and restore order, they allowed themselves to feel. They dove deep into the confusion, and it was there, amidst tears and reflection, that they began to see the roots of what needed to change. To find clarity, they understood they first had to embrace the storm. This process is everywhere, in the stories we tell and the myths that shape us. Look at Gregor Samsa in The Metamorphosis by Kafka. He wakes up transformed into a grotesque insect, and his life descends into absolute chaos. It's a tragic story, but also a mirror of what happens when rupture exposes truths buried under the weight of routine. Or think of the phoenix, which rises from its ashes, transforming destruction into renewal. It's not just a beautiful myth, it's a symbolic representation of what we undergo internally when chaos forces us to start anew. But here's the point. How do we navigate chaos without losing ourselves in it? First, we must accept that it is inevitable. Resisting it only makes the process longer and more painful. Instead, there are ways to navigate this turbulent terrain. Write. Don't worry about perfection or logic. Just put down what you feel on paper. Let the words flow unfiltered, as if you were emptying out a messy drawer. Practice self-compassion. Moments of chaos don't demand perfection from you. No one weathers a storm without getting wet. Seek support. Talk to trusted friends or a therapist. Sometimes hearing another perspective can bring clarity and lighten the burden you're carrying. Connect with your body. Breathe. Walk. Feel the ground beneath your feet. When everything seems to be falling apart, returning to the present can be the anchor you need. What we need to remember is that chaos doesn't last forever. The man who figured out his life learned this the hard but transformative way. He realized that no matter how endless the confusion seemed, it was just a phase. By accepting the mess, he allowed his psyche to reorganize everything in a way that was more truthful and aligned with who he really was. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This doesn't mean we should seek out suffering. It simply means that discomfort is an opportunity, a calling. Just as gold is refined by fire, we too are transformed through difficulties. The question is, what is the chaos in your life trying to teach you? What old certainties need to be left behind? The answers might be closer than you think. All it takes is the courage to look beyond the disorder and see the seeds of a new life. If you could see yourself completely, without filters or masks, light and shadow, strengths and weaknesses, what would you see? Carl Jung believed this is the starting point for true self-realization. For him, it's not about erasing our flaws or rejecting what we consider imperfect, but about integrating all parts of ourselves. This is what he called individuation, the process of becoming whole. Modern society, however, loves to push us in the opposite direction. We showcase our best versions, successes, happy moments, everything that earns approval. Social media amplifies this. They are windows into lives that seem flawless, but deep down, hide as much as they reveal. And what happens to the parts of ourselves that don't fit into this perfect mold? Jung said that denying them doesn't make them disappear. On the contrary, it only increases their power over us. It's like closing your eyes to a shadow. It doesn't go away, it only grows larger. The person who has resolved their life realizes this. They understand that hiding their fears, mistakes, and the things they're ashamed of only keeps them trapped. It's by facing these parts and embracing them that they begin to discover who they truly are. What they avoided looking at contained the deepest lessons and the keys to their transformation. To imagine this process, think of the yin-yang symbol. The white area contains a black dot, and the black area contains a white dot. There is no light without shadow, and no shadow without light. It's a reminder that our strength comes precisely from this duality, this dynamic balance between opposites. Integrating light and shadow means recognizing that we are both and learning to live in harmony with this reality. In practice, this integration starts with small steps, and it all begins with acceptance. Not a resigned acceptance, but a courageous one that looks at oneself with honesty and compassion. When you make a mistake, instead of harshly criticizing yourself, ask, "What can this teach me?" This simple act of self-kindness is transformative. Another step is paying attention to your projections. How many times has something or someone deeply bothered you? Jung said this often reveals something you're denying within yourself. The discomfort is a mirror. Perhaps someone's attitude reflects something you repress or don't want to acknowledge. By exploring these projections, you can learn a great deal about yourself. Creativity is also an ally in this process. Sometimes our shadows speak to us through less obvious means. Dreams, strange sensations, symbols, art, music, writing. These can all serve as bridges to access those hidden messages and transform them into something you can understand. Above all, remember that the goal is not to seek perfection. It's about learning to coexist with your internal conflicts. You can feel fear and courage at the same time, anger and gratitude, insecurity and strength. These opposites don't negate who you are. They make you human. This integration of light and shadow is not just about you. When you learn to be kinder to your flaws, you begin to see others with greater compassion as well. Think of that harsh judgment you passed on someone. What if instead, you saw that person as someone who also carries their own lights and shadows? Imagine how that could change your interactions. For Jung, this work of integration goes beyond self-awareness. He believed that by becoming more whole, we create a positive impact on the world around us. The person who resolved their inner struggles realized that their internal journey not only transformed their relationship with themselves, but also improved their relationships and choices. They began to act with more awareness, less reactivity, and greater presence. Now let me ask you, what would happen if you accepted all parts of who you are, without hiding anything, without pretending the shadows don't exist? It might seem frightening at first, but at the same time, it's liberating. All the energy you spend trying to appear as something you're not could instead be directed toward living authentically. Jung once said, "I'd rather be whole than good." This doesn't mean giving up on goodness, but understanding that genuine kindness can only arise from integration. When we embrace our shadows, we become less likely to act impulsively or project our insecurities onto others. We begin to live in greater balance and awareness. Life isn't about eliminating imperfections, it's about learning from them. It's the dance between light and shadow that gives us the depth of being human. Along this journey, you'll realize that what matters most isn't the final destination, but the path itself. What have you been avoiding within yourself? What could those parts teach you if you had the courage to face them head on? The answer is there, waiting for the moment you choose to embrace all that you are. What does it mean to leave a legacy? Many believe it's something grand, an eternal mark, like a monument or a name etched in history. But what if the true legacy were invisible? Not something we can touch or measure, but an internal transformation so powerful that it shapes not only our lives, but also the lives of those around us. For the man who resolved his life, the legacy was not a great achievement or an extraordinary feat. It was his journey of self-discovery and acceptance, which inspired others to follow the same path. Carl Jung offered a fascinating perspective on this. He said that true fulfillment doesn't come from becoming superior, but from becoming whole. This process of integration, light and shadow, virtues and flaws, is what he called individuation, and it goes beyond ourselves. When we find balance within, it reverberates, like ripples on a lake, transforming not only our lives but also the world around us. Imagine a circle. Picture each person occupying a point within it. When someone undergoes an internal change, it shifts the dynamics around them, influencing their relationships, decisions, and even future generations. A true legacy, then, is not a grand act. It's the sum of small changes that create a lasting impact. It's the kind of transformation that doesn't make noise but changes everything. For Jung, resolving life is about finding purpose, not a purpose imposed from the outside, like a degree or a title, but something that emerges from within, from what truly matters to you. This man, by confronting his shadow, integrating his inner conflicts, and embracing who he truly was, found something deeper than a mere goal. He found meaning, and that changed everything: his choices, his relationships, even the way he faced challenges. He discovered that the secret wasn't to fix the entire world, but to adjust his relationship with it. He accepted its imperfections, recognized his own limits, and finally realized that the answers he had been searching for were within him all along. This understanding didn't make him selfish. On the contrary, it allowed him to give the best of himself to others. Want a practical example? Think of someone who spends years prioritizing work, believing that professional success is the only way to feel valued. Then, one day, that person stops and looks inward. They discover that what they truly desire is much simpler: spending time with the people they love and building deep connections. This shift not only transforms their life, but also strengthens their bonds with those around them. Resolving one's life doesn't mean abandoning dreams or responsibilities. It means aligning them with what truly makes sense to you. Jung also reminds us of something important. There's a greater mystery in all of this. He was fascinated by spirituality, mythology, and synchronicity, those coincidences that seem to carry meaning. For him, integrating these dimensions into our lives connects us to something beyond the ordinary, giving us a sense of belonging in the world. A metaphor that captures this well is that of an unfinished work of art. Our lives will never be complete or perfect, but what matters is the constant effort to shape them, to find beauty and purpose in the process. Think of a recent moment when you felt that everything made sense, even if just for a few seconds. Those small moments of alignment are fragments of what it means to live with purpose. And this is what makes the story of the man who resolved his life so universal. It's not just about him, it's about all of us. Each of us carries within the potential to transform confusion into clarity, fear into courage, shadow into wisdom. But to do so, we must make a choice: to look inward, accept what we find, and build something meaningful with it. So if you could leave a legacy today, what would it say about you? Don't underestimate the impact of small actions. Figuring out life is a daily commitment to self-discovery and authenticity, and that commitment is the greatest gift you can give to the world. The idea of figuring out life often sounds like reaching a perfect state of peace and fulfillment, but the truth is much more human, and therefore more powerful. It's not about eliminating problems or weaknesses. It's about accepting who we are, with our light and shadows, and living authentically from that place. As Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The person who has figured out life has awakened to something simple yet transformative. True change begins within. They've realized that the shadow is not an enemy but a guide, that chaos is not destruction but the beginning of something new, that individuation is not isolation but reconnection with the whole. And you don't need all the answers right now. In fact, you may never have them all. And that's okay. Life isn't about a final destination. It's a continuous process, a dance between accepting who we are and growing through it. If there's one thing to take from this, it's this: the most important work we can do is internal. It's there that we find meaning, purpose, and above all, peace. And no matter where you are on this path, there's always room to take the next step. After all, the greatest legacy we can leave is to be our whole, authentic selves. Before we wrap up, I want to share a small personal story with you. There was a moment in my life when everything felt disconnected. It was as if I were walking in circles, repeatedly asking myself, why doesn't anything make sense? It was during this turbulent period that I came across Jung's ideas. It wasn't an instant revelation or a magical moment of enlightenment. It was a slow process, almost like unraveling internal knots I didn't even know existed. And little by little, I began to understand that the answers I was so desperately searching for outside were, in fact, within me all along. This journey wasn't about fixing anything, but about embracing my own humanity, with all its flaws, complexities, and beauty, and that led me to something much deeper than I had ever anticipated. I want to take this moment to thank you for being here, present, and engaging in such an intimate and sometimes challenging reflection. It's not easy to look inward, and the simple fact that you're willing to give attention to these ideas speaks volumes about your courage and the openness you carry. If this video touched you in any way, don't hesitate to share your experience in the comments. Never underestimate the power of your story. It could be the starting point, the spark someone else needs to begin their own journey of self-discovery. And now, I want to congratulate you. Yes, you, for making it this far, for taking one more step towards self-awareness. Whether it's a small or significant step, it's an important one. Don't forget to like this video, share it with that friend who's always questioning life, and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring topics that can transform how you see yourself in the world. Oh, and before you go, you'll see 2 video suggestions on the screen that could broaden your perspective even further. Which one will you choose? Don't worry, choices are never random. Click and see where this decision might take you. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, every step inward is a step toward who you truly are.